Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Ange MacCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuity Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here.
I'd love to give a warm welcome to Stefanie Krievins, who is the president of the Change Architects. And her team at the Change Architects work with companies mostly in the IT industry, who are growing, innovating, upskilling, and digitally transforming, but are stuck in the messy middle of change and are having growing pains. Essentially, the companies that they work with need solutions to get their people and teams to tackle old problems in new ways, break down silos, and get communication and new results flowing again. Stefanie leads a firm focused on designing the workforces of the future through upskilling plans, succession plans, and strategic execution. She is a trained coach and certified in multiple assessments and methodologies. And let me tell you, she's passionate about what she does. She's also the host of the Hot Mess Hotline, a podcast for ambitious leaders who want to drive impactful change. She's the creator of the Change Architect, which provides a new framework for driving transformation in the 21st century. As well as on a personal note, and also it denotes what type of personality Stefanie is walking into the podcast with. She is petrified or has a fear of heights, and to tackle said fear, has gone skydiving. Stefanie, welcome. So glad that you're here.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
And so help me understand, you in the green room, we started talking about things with regards to kind of the 7 units or the 7 pieces of the Change Architect. What does that look like?
Yeah. So this comes from my work with a lot of tech companies and tech leaders. And at the end of the day, this is about kind of those shared services inside of organizations. Those shared, and this applies to HR, it applies to marketing, but those functions are hit with multiple priorities, multiple trends that they have to be on the lookout for, multiple impacts of the silos in our organization, really stalling their businesses and what they're able to produce for their colleagues and their clients, their internal clients. I had to say, all of these executive leaders have so many competing commitments, competing priorities coming at them on a daily and weekly basis. They don't need one more thing. And change management is just one more thing on your plate.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially in IT, where the next thing is always coming. In 2022, it was digital transformation, and then it was AI. Next year, it's going to be the next thing. There's always the next thing coming, while all these other priorities are hitting you in the face at the same time. And so I didn't want to go to my clients and say, you know what, in order to be successful, you need one more thing. I said, my superpower is connecting the dots. So let's connect the dots on what leaders are charged with delivering. You've got business strategy, you've got daily operations. There is very little methodology that connects those two things successfully. Strategic execution is done very poorly in virtually all organizations. Okay, how can I solve for all of that?
Right.
And at the same time, most leaders' skills around change management is change is hard and no one likes change, so we're going to quit. Or I'm going to push it through by sheer will by myself. And so that's where the change architecture came from, piloting these different programs with clients to say, what unifies strategic plans, daily execution, and all the stuff you're being hit with at the same time. And so the change architecture has self-leadership, team leadership, individual change tools, organizational change tools, talent experience fundamentals, as well as internal, clear, compelling, inspirational communication. Whether or not you have an internal comms person or not, someone has to be responsible for clear, compelling communication that is repeated multiple times, just like marketing or external marketing, as well as productivity systems, so that the way that your organization works has a consistent project management that is completely adopted from the top to the bottom. A lot of folks we work with say, oh, we do agile. I'm like, oh, really? What does that mean? Well, we went to the training. Oh, what percentage of your staff are actually doing agile? Oh, about 5%. That's not doing agile. Project management should be the promise that you make to your stakeholders about how work gets done,
Right.
how you scope it, how you create milestones, how you deliver on your deadlines, how you adjust when things don't go according to plan. People need to understand what to expect when working with you. And I think most of us can say IT is not very good at creating promises or delivering on promises for things that the business needs. Oh, well, we can fix that. That's easy to fix. And so that's sorry, the long version of like, this is what change architecture is it unifies all the strategies that you're already responsible for and connects the dots between all of them, so that the tools and the processes that you're using are all connect to each other and are all delivering on the same thing, versus leadership development over here and communications over here, and we need to do something about change management over here, and oh yeah, we should probably all do agile at some point over here. No, let's make their purpose and intent align together so that you can then prioritize the rollout of these different elements and be much more likely to be successful.
That resonates. Absolutely. Hearing you in that, you're not adding one more thing to IT's plate, but rather you're connecting the dots, or you're threading their operations
Yes.
with their leadership, with their culture, etc.
Yes.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. You said something in there about myth busters. Help me bust these myths when it comes to this whole ideal that change is hard. Where do you feel that this comes from, and what is your passion around, or I guess methodology to busting those myths?
Yeah. So this two places, and this is where self-leadership is mission critical. We do not spend enough time in our organizations teaching people how to lead themselves first. And then we just give them a team of 10 people to lead. And they're like, oh, go lead these 10 people.
Yeah.
But you haven't demonstrated that you can effectively lead yourself. Do you have your own leadership manifesto? Can you manage your fears? Can you manage your insecurities? The answer is no, you're not ready for leadership, and a whole host of other things, right?
Absolutely. And you're speaking my language, but I want to slow down just for 1 second to unpack
Yeah.
this. So when it comes to self-leadership, what I'm hearing is that it's really allowing that leader to morph from management, so managing tasks,
Mm-hmm.
to a leadership realm, managing people, which means that they need to understand themselves first. They need to understand
Yes.
their triggers. They need to understand
Yes.
where are they at with their baseline of behaviors and emotional intelligence and grit, and not grits like food, but like real grit and resilience.
Yes. Yes.
Slurring my words over here. And, essentially looking at it from the perspective of, okay, I need to unpack myself as a leader first before I can actually give back and lead someone else.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
And so how do you approach leaders to really see the value behind that self-leadership piece?
Yeah, here's my entry point that I find really resonates with folks, because they're unaware of it until we articulate it and name it and then
Right.
figure out how to problem solve for it. And it's the notion of how we tend to lead with fear. And this came from my work with a group of COOs who had spans of control from anywhere from 2 direct reports to the entire organization of 150, right underneath the CEO. And what I noticed in their language pattern was that they were saying things like, well, I'm afraid to have the hard conversation because I'm afraid that person will leave. I'm afraid to implement too much accountability because I'm afraid people will leave. I'm afraid to fill in the blank. I'm afraid to fill in the blank. And when I looked around at the most successful leaders that just had that obviously like air of confidence, but a very clear, like internal sense of knowing,
Mhm.
and really owned their role and really understood that their title, not who they are as a human being, their title in the organization gave them the command to make these decisions, to set these expectations for how this culture would operate.
Right.
And so I facilitated several conversations around, what does it mean to lead with fear? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What do you feel in your body when you do this?
Mhm.
And now the flip side, now that we can see it and name it and hear it and
Yes,
feel it, let's lead with confidence instead, and
yes,
just own your role. Owning your identity as a human being is another bucket of work. Own your role, because a lot of leaders nowadays we know command and control leadership is a no-go. It's really never worked effectively. We just told ourselves that several decades ago.
yeah,
But like that's all they kind of know. And they think, well, man, if I'm really confident, then I only use command and control. No, be really confident and coach. Be really confident and delegate effectively. Be really confident and allow for room for that other person to be really confident too. And
yeah,
ultimately, what you're doing is you're creating space for people to say hell yes to the work
right.
versus, oh, let's walk on eggshells all around each other, because that creates a gross culture.
I see that too, and I see it from two perspectives. It's like either walking on eggshells, or there's that constant debate of mannerism that also derives from fear, in the sense of I'm right, you're wrong, and
Yes.
my way is better than your way.
Yes.
And so how do you debunk that? How do you work with leaders to understand that there's a necessary evil to lean into soft skills and kind of roll their sleeves up and feel a little bit icky at first because it's outside of task orientation. How do you
Oh.
approach that?
Yeah, so we've got the neuroscience perspective, which I
Yeah,
feel like I know enough to be dangerous about.
yes.
Um, and then, pardon me, go back and I got so excited about the neuroscience I wanted to share. Go back and repeat that
I love
question for me.
neuroscience. Start there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so, and this comes from Stephen Kotler's work in particular, but we know, and we've known in personal development, that all growth comes from discomfort, right? And the popular saying, this information comes from Stephen Kotler's work, and I love it because he gives a number to this. We've known for a long time that growth does not happen in our comfort zone. Growth happens when we're uncomfortable, but how uncomfortable? Like, is it a little? Is it a lot? Because there's aspects of being so uncomfortable at the extreme. There's trauma that's created. We don't want trauma in the workplace. That would suck. But Stephen Kotler says that the amount of challenge you need is 15%.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. I was like, that, yeah, agreed. That makes sense. And so, but in some ways, it's like, how do you categorize 15% uncomfortable and having difficult conversations? I don't know. I don't freaking know.
Here, let's get the whiteboard up and we can really
Yeah.
talk these things, right? No, I totally hear you. And I think it comes back down to looking at it relatively per leader as to what are you trying to accomplish with the discomfort. And
Yes.
that can allow you to identify what the success story looks like. And it's, to me, it's not so much 15%, it's even that 1%. So going from a place of, holding in an opinion as a leader to saying, hey, I have an opinion, but I have an opinion and I'd like to think about it and come back to you. That to me is 1% growth.
Oh,
Versus
great.
oftentimes what we see in these superstars, IT people, biotech's the same as well, life sciences, is that what they start to apply the theories of zero to many, in the sense that they have the expectation that when they learn a skill set, it's going to be, a one game, whereas it should be the 1% growth kind of
Mm,
rule of thumb type things. It's kind
yep.
of what hits for me.
Mhm. Yes. Um, and if you think about, so I'm an overachiever by nature, and most days I try to just be a high achiever, right? Like overachievers stress ourselves out. We take things too far. Like we burn ourselves out because we're just so driven. Like to be a high achiever, if you improve by 1% every single day, you are light years ahead of where you started on January 1 of 2024 and where you end December 31st. And so I think for folks listening in, when you think about stepping into growth, stepping into discomfort, what's one small thing you can do today that that helps you grow? And yes, you're going to be uncomfortable, but helps you grow. And like that example you gave where you said, you know what, I have an idea about how to approach this. I don't have all my thoughts formulated. So I'd like to, follow up with a meeting tomorrow. That's actually incredibly brave in Western work cultures, because in Western work cultures, we idealize the people's ability to like brainstorm and make decisions on the fly. Just because they're fast decisions doesn't mean they're great decisions. Just because they're slow decisions also doesn't mean they're thoughtful decisions either. But we over index on our ability to come together and just have one conversation, be super efficient about that issue, and then move forward. I think the people that create space for true thought, discernment, reflection, that's unbelievably brave in our workplaces nowadays.
Yes, and I really appreciate your passion behind it. It's necessary because it's
Yes.
almost like, you know, from a leadership perspective, and we're kind of going offside a little bit, but it makes sense here from a place of context that leaders need to understand the fact that they aren't just responsible of being an A player or an achiever. They're also responsible for continuous growth. And that's where competitiveness and innovation really plays because, you know, what's it like for you versus me versus someone else, Stefanie, when it comes to being pressure or an overachiever, et cetera, et cetera? Those are very different definitions. And so I think
Yes.
it comes full circle to what you were saying earlier with regards to the fact that it's all about that self-leadership and understanding what does that mean? How many core competencies are there really for leaders and what makes sense for my organization and for myself? And I think you're doing amazing work in the space of really being able to tangibly identify change management throughout the organization so that it threads the different departments together versus creating further divides. Because
Yes.
we know that the working world is going more towards a project base versus working in isolated silos, right?
Great point. Yes. Yes, you're right. One last point here is like we've dug into a lot of research about the future of work, and just to jump off what you just said, the future of work, because we're especially in knowledge services, not all industries.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be careful about how I frame this because there's some big social justice implications as well. But AI should be able to do some of the base level stuff that just takes up our time as knowledge workers. Generating first drafts, generating milestones and deadlines for a project. Doesn't have to be finalized, but right, like the things that just take time and minimal effort, but kind of eat
Yes,
into our decision making
yes.
capacity each day. Those are great things. And so the way of the future is not efficiency or effectiveness. So efficiency is like, how do we get things done with as little resources as possible? Effectiveness is, and this is a bit of a play on words here, and Stefanie Krievins like vocabulary, but effectiveness is like doing the right thing. Efficacy in pharmacology is getting the right results. Like the pressure on our time and financial and people resources in the future will be about getting the right results,
Mm-hmm.
not writing a great email, not generating a great project plan. Does the process add up to the right result because we're delivering projects together?
I absolutely love this and would love to hear more of your Stefanie Krievins words here. Help us unpack a little bit further because what's coming up in my mind in looking at the industry right now is, especially when we're looking at IT against the sciences, we'll just say, right?
Yes, yes.
When we're looking at those industries, oftentimes leaders, and this is just a general thought process of trends, leaders tend to run into pace setting, meaning that it has to be done fast, it has to be done correct, it has to be done on time, on project, on budget. How does that roll into your thought process of looking at it in the sense of getting things done properly from a place of quality versus that kind of pace setting mentality? Like, how does that differ?
The first thing I go to as a coach is we can't pit those two things against each other like they're mutually exclusive. It's how do we have both? And one of the things that I learned from one of my mentors is this powerful question of what needs to be true to make that possible? So, how can we deliver on time with quality?
But
How can we set a pace that allows us to deliver on time with quality? And so my brain literally thinks in like Venn diagrams sometimes, right? Like, how do we overlap those and go to the center and be like, this is what we want right here? And so some of that is allowing some of the humanness back into the workplace, like what we're talking about on this podcast,
right.
because humans need time to think, to reflect, to discern. If you're an organization that values innovation, but you only also value speed, yes, you want people to fail fast. Yes, you want them to pilot things, experiment, and they need time to think in order to come up with experiments, in order to figure out what's working and what's not. I was thinking about this the other day. In my first job out of grad school, I would sit at my desk and think, and I was kind of by the coffee maker. And so people would walk by and they'd be like, well, what are you doing? I was like, I'm thinking, like that notion of you sit and think is completely gone by the wayside.
It's what you don't have like another TikTok scroll coming through every 8 seconds? No?
Yeah, no, no, no. Oh my gosh. I heard this the other day, and our addiction to consumption in Western culture is through the roof. Ange, that's a whole other conversation. We're gonna have to have a whole other episode on, but
On board with it.
okay. It's just, talk about non-self leadership. But yeah, I think it's starting with the question of how can all three of those things be true at once, and being really, really, really honest with yourself as a leader of, does this really have to go on this deadline because of some very real factor? Or are we creating pressure for efficiency's sake? Are we creating pressure for there is benefit in pressure, like a diamond, right? Like, let's create pressure and see what we can create because of the 15% growth marker. Just say that out loud. Like, the reason we're creating pressure, the reason we're moving forward is because we just want to see what we can do, and then we'll learn from it.
Mhm.
But if you're just creating pressure for pressure's sake because you promised your boss X, Y, and Z deliverable by April 15th, like, who cares, man? Like, who cares?
But I shouldn't say but. As a coach, I would say, and how do you debunk or assist teams in unlearning those thought processes? Because they're so far embedded in us. Like, it's almost like
Yes.
what's been rattling around in my brain the past few months, and I'm trying to stitch this together. Maybe there's a reason why you're sitting here in front of me right now.
Say, let me coach you, Ange.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm totally open to it. What's been rattling around in my brain is that oftentimes when it comes to leadership, we speak to best practices
Mhm.
and we speak to what it should be. However, there's some sort of blocker with regards to identifying and articulating where we're currently at because it relates to so far in the past, like Fordism. So Fordism meaning, the start of real productive or production leadership, pace setting. Like it's an older school thought, essentially, to be blunt.
Yep.
And moving a bit forward with that, it's, how do you allow and give that safe space for your team members to be vulnerable, to talk about where they're currently at versus where they're not? And making that okay. That's one thing that I'm super passionate about in the workplace is that we need to let go of all these veneers that leadership is phenomenal and we're set up for success and I'm not saying let's have a gripe session. I'm not going the other direction.
Yep.
But I'm looking at it from a realistic or pragmatic approach to be like, hey, we have strengths here. Let's play on this.
Yep.
And here's where we have had some blind spots in past, i.e., supporting team members through change. So what is it, using your words, what is our truth in making sure that we support our team members through change? And so I guess my roundabout long way question is, how do we morph out of older actions into newer aged actions to ensure that we're supporting the things that we're advocating for?
The simple yet not easy answer is time to think, time to meditate, time to learn, time to unlearn old habits. The stuff that keeps us stuck is fear. We're stuck in our limbic brain, our lizard brain, the thing that tells us to react, to cover our asses, to put on the veneer, right? The creative economy, the knowledge service economy moved out of Fordism. I've never heard that, but that makes sense. But it's just industrial revolution
Yeah.
talk for people are the cog, people are inputs, people are resources. No, they're human beings. They
And they're
share
your
their
biggest asset,
talents.
by the way.
Oh, yes, yes, and your biggest expense for their payroll, like, I believe strongly that the workplace, everything is an invitation. It's an invitation to be there, it's an invitation to stay there. Employees and individual employees and organizations come together for a finite amount of time to create value.
Mhm.
Employees agree to give their experience, to learn, to grow, to bring to the table what they bring to the table, same as the company, right? Like the company also brings resources to the table for that employee to do work so that those two entities can deliver value together. Like we've
Mhm.
lost sight of that in some ways. Like we go to work because work is productive. We have a right and responsibility to work, right? It's part of our creative outlet. It's part of what makes us human. In my line of thinking, I know not everyone jives with that, but in my line of thinking. And organizations have responsibilities to people, but we must remember work is an invitation.
Mhm.
No one has to be in that job, in that role, in that organization. You just don't have to in the 21st century.
Right.
Now, if you're in a slave situation, call me. I'll help you escape. But that's not who we're talking to. But we also, employees still apply that mindset to work, right? Like, my boss makes me do this. I have to do this. Like, no, it's all an invitation. Let's be here together because we want to.
Mhm.
So to me, that's the premise, right? You got to unlock that way of thinking on the employee side for those who have it. And the leader, the representative of the organization, has to get out of that doom loop of like, these are people and they're here because I say they have to, and I pay them, so they have to do it. No, like,
Yeah.
no, that's not true.
Yes.
So you
Yes.
break habits by creating space to learn new ones and unlearn old new ones.
Mhm.
But in our culture of consumption, we don't have free space in between our ears to rethink old paradigms
Mhm.
and come up with new solutions. That's the
Mhm.
bottom line. There's many other tactics on top of it, but like I'm a super incisive person, and why I also like piss people off is like, bottom line is we have to create time to think. Sorry, I went on a soapbox. That's just
I
I got
no,
all juiced up.
what's coming up for me based on what you've identified currently is that the gap that we're having in today's day and age is that the expectation is we're supposed to drink from a water hose when it comes to information and
Mm-hmm.
be able to output like a chat GPT
Mm-hmm.
function or app.
Yes.
And that's not the case.
Nope.
That's a story that we're telling ourselves
Yes.
internally and externally within our
Because
organization.
humans aren't robots. Humans
We're
are
not,
not robots,
no.
period.
And I tend to agree with you. Going back a few moments here, I really agree with the fact that AI should be leveraged. Of course, it should as a source document, in the
Yes.
sense of being able to identify some of those mundane, maybe administrative tasks, excuse, et cetera, et cetera. But I was really intrigued what you were identifying with, and the fact that in today's day and age, it's looking at supporting people from a human-centric approach, is what I'm hearing, the crux of it.
Mhm.
And within that human-centric approach, a gap that we're having is the fact that we're not slowing down and taking the time to reflect, which is a superpower for us as humans.
Yes.
Tell me more about what you have seen in your experience with organizations when given that time and space to reflect. What type of innovation has come out of this? Like, what's the ROI for businesses to really buy into this?
Oh, yeah. And I want to preface the answer with, I'm not asking folks to go into monk mode. I'm
No.
saying, because I think most leaders here like, oh, you want people to have like time to think. What does that mean? Google, like, do they get a year's sabbatical every 3 years? What are you talking about? No. Google's pretty famous for their 20%, free thinking time, creative time, growth time, and some of the amazing innovations that emerge from that, like Gmail. So I'm forever grateful for that free thinking time because I love Gmail. So you can do that on a weekly basis for something more consistent. Going away for a retreat, couple of days or a week, facilitated by somebody who's a bit more objective to the team, usually brings out more insights as well. Just that pause from email. In my team, we do 7-week rest, which I borrowed from somebody online, so I don't want to take credit for it. But every 7 weeks, we don't have external meetings. We only have internal meetings, and we have a ton of desk time to get caught up, to plan for the things that are upcoming for us, just to give us some breathing room. And we're in the consulting industry, like we trade time for dollars a lot. And every 7 weeks, we're not out meeting with our clients. We're still doing important work. So any kind of regular cadence that allows people some breathing room, I think is wonderful. Also, the pressure of a 30-hour work week, just to slide that in. 30-hour work week with the same salary and expectation for results creates a good kind of pressure to cut out productivity theater, to cut out unnecessary work, provide focus, those kinds of things. The ROI is, I was just with the team yesterday, and we did a little half-day session together. And what I see is there's kind of a sigh of relief. And I know you can't monetize a sigh of relief, but when you see leaders just kind of be like, oh, I can do this. Oh, this simple little shift is going to, change the results. This simple little idea is going to break down silos. Let's go and do that. Like those moments, those tiny little shifts pay off in huge ways in the next quarter. I learned early on from a mentor, like you don't make big shifts. I don't play golf, but this I think makes sense for folks, right? If you want the ball to go 400 feet to the right, you don't completely change your angle on the ball. You change your angle on the golf ball by a millimeter to make it in the long run go 400 feet to the right. Like it's those little shifts that pay off. And so just creating those sighs of relief and the ability for your leaders to be like, oh yeah, go back to basics. It creates huge results in the long term because people feel like they have agency again over their work versus all the inputs coming in feeling out of control. And those are where teams' best ideas come from. It's when they lose focus on those best ideas because they get so inundated with the busy work that they again need thinking time. They need to go back, come back to the ranch, as I call it, come back to the ranch and refocus on what really moves the needle. And it cuts down a lot of the mental noise and organizational noise that is created from too much, not enough time. This is hard. It's no, we're just talking about some, few simple focused actions that really move the needle. The whole Pareto principle, 80-20, right? 20% of what you focus on creates 80% of the results. Time away allows you to get back to the 20% and the other noise to fall away.
How can I normalize this thought process? Because I mean, you have me subscribe to it in the sense that when you create that space, that's where a lot of reflection and innovation can naturally happen. Oftentimes in most workplaces, it's like, I unwind by doing yoga, or, in a shower, I thought of this, and that's acceptable. However, it's not coming full throttle with regards to really creating that space that is an impetus of actual growth, to your point. So my question is, how do we look to start shifting those mindsets of everything has to be fast paced, everything has to be, the next burning fire, the next email, the next operational thing? How do we really get leaders to buy in to intentional leadership and trusting that with that behind them, that's where the productivity lies?
Yeah. So one strategic answer, one tactical answer. the strategic answer is going to circle back to project management. How do you all deliver on your promises to your stakeholders through project management that values a cadence of slow productivity, as Cal Newport would call it, thoughtful work. I heard a term yesterday, actually, with my clients that I was with yesterday. I learned from them the one-way door and two-way door mentality, right? If it's a one-way door, once you leave, I just learned this. I was like, I don't always know all the fun jargon, but once you go through that one-way door with this work, there ain't no coming back. It has to be slow. It has to be thoughtful. You have to include more people to get it right, because no turning around. The two-way door, the singular email, for example, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect. So go fast with that. So I think identifying projects from the get-go with, is this a one-way door or a two-way door, or whatever labels make sense in your organization. I am insistent that every project have a project charter and has some basic project management methodology to it, where the leader sets the expectations for pace, for learnings, for success criteria, for milestones with the group. But the leader says, this is the pace that we will operate this project on. The leader must go first in holding themselves and other people accountable to working that pace.
Right. Absolutely. I could really jam with you for hours, Stefanie. So I think there's a part two that has to come up. Seriously, we'll chat in the green room afterwards. But help us understand how you and your team truly serve.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So in an ideal situation, we would come in and really get to understand through a series of assessments, where are you at with these 7 buckets of work?
Yes.
How tied together are they? How tied together to your strategic plan are you? A really nice assessment phase that helps us understand, where do you have connection and alignment and great things happening? Where do you have disconnection, a lack of integration, silos that are holding back the work? And then we would suggest, based on what we're seeing, talent experience fundamentals like job descriptions, skills inventory to connect current skills to future skills needed in 10 years in your organization, leadership development programs, change management training and development, assisting your comms person or being an add-on comms person for key initiatives and strategically communicating, teaching leaders how to strategically communicate, or, helping your organization get something by way of project management and workflows designed and completely implemented. So we come alongside. I really feel like our job is to be as efficient as possible with you all, to keep projects cost effective, to run a no BS zone. It's like, we're just going to cut to the chase so that we can come in and support you and help you move as quickly as possible as it makes sense, because humans don't learn in a linear fashion, right? Like, we're going to walk alongside your people, but we're going to cut out the BS in the way, because that's part of our secret sauce. And then the next is we're going to train you on everything that we're doing, because we want to be with you for a year, 18 months, 2 years, because that's just the nature of what it takes to make this work create momentum in your culture. But we're going to teach you everything we're doing along the way so that you can continue to do this once we're gone, because this is your organization. These are your goals. It's your team. It's your culture. We're here to support and equip and train and upskill, but we want you all to keep going with exactly what we're doing too. So that's how we think about it.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Stefanie, for your time and expertise today on the Human Side of Business podcast. How can people reach out to you?
Yeah. We run a podcast too called the Hot Mess Hotline, like you mentioned in the intro. And you can find that and all sorts of other goodies and our approach at thechangearchitects.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the Whole Person Leadership Cohort by Intuity Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.